Hey everyone! This is my first devlog, where I want to talk about the game I'm currently working on. I'm making the game completely by myself. I'm a 3D artist, but I also have some experience in game development. In the past, I worked as a programmer in a studio on mobile games. After that, I got into drawing and considered myself a 2D artist for a long time, making game graphics. Now I mostly work with 3D art, creating models and animating them. Over the last couple of years, I've been really inspired by the idea of making my own game, solo. It wasn't an immediate decision. I first tried teaming up with other enthusiasts to make games in our spare time. But I ended up really disappointed with that approach. Either you end up with a strict hierarchy, where everyone has limited responsibilities. And then, what's the point? It's just like a job, but without the pay. Or it turns into chaos, where everyone tries to do everything, and the team eventually falls apart because no one is happy with the results. In the end, I found the only solution that works for me, making the game entirely by myself. Sure, it takes longer, but it's way more fun, because I get to create the world exactly how I want it to be. The concept for the game came together pretty quickly, based on my gaming experience and preferences. It was going to be a 3D game about crafting, combat, exploration, and building. Not an MMORPG, of course, but still pretty ambitious, which honestly felt a bit overwhelming. But I planned to approach it smartly, break the concept down into smaller pieces. The idea was to release a few smaller mobile games where I could test out the mechanics I needed, build up a library of models, and then move on to the final project, already having some assets to work with. In the meantime, I'd sell the models on 3D stock platforms to at least partially cover the time I spent on them. But once again, things didn't work out. I had to give up on selling models on stock platforms, abandon Unity, and let go of the 3D world. Still, I couldn't imagine not working on my own game. So, after rethinking everything again, I realized it would be best to focus on a 2D game instead. I'm a huge fan of games like RimWorld, Oxygen Not Included, and I even keep an eye on the original Dwarf Fortress from time to time. So, the genre became obvious immediately. It had to be a colony simulator. I wanted to take the best mechanics from my favorite games and make it exactly the way I like. That means no guns or sci-fi, but lots of planning, complexity, and definitely trains. So, the project has now turned into a classic 2D colony simulator in an open fantasy world. My main sources of inspiration are games like RimWorld, Oxygen Not Included, The Sims, and a bit of World of Warcraft. I really love the visual style of RimWorld HSK. For those who don't know, HSK is a mod pack with tons of content and redesigned graphics. I actually created a few mods for RimWorld and HSK myself a while back, and I decided to use that style as the base for my game. I guess I still feel like I didn't get enough of drawing all those little workbenches and beds that fascinated me so much back then. But in classic RimWorld, I really love the graphic style where the characters are these simple, armless and legless figures with no animations, yet still personalized enough. A similar approach is used in Prison Architect, another game I love and have spent many hours playing. However, the character and world design in classic RimWorld isn't exactly what I want for my game. I'm aiming for something more like Battle Brothers. In that game, the characters are these pawn-like figures on little stands, but they're very detailed. Even without animations, you can still get emotionally attached to them. The monsters too create a real sense of danger, even though they're just static images on a grid. The main task for the player will be building a base and exploring the world. The building aspect is classic. We're looking at something similar to RimWorld and Oxygen Not Included, but ideally leaning more towards Dwarf Fortress. Rooms will be formed from wall blocks, you'll place workstations, everything will feel familiar. Of course, the base will be under attack from time to time, and settlers will always have needs, get sick, and suffer in some way. The player's job will be to help them overcome those challenges. As for world exploration, we have a huge open world that's randomly generated when the map is created. It's similar to Factorio, where you start building your base in the central area and gradually expand it, exploring new territories, setting up small outposts, and working to establish logistics. I really hope that one day I'll be able to add trains to the game too. The map will feature different points of interest and various resources that players will need to gather, process, and transport back to the main base. I absolutely love the approach used in Oxygen Not Included's new expansion with rockets, where you discover a new asteroid and send a colonist there. First, they focus on survival and comfort, then they set up production and start contributing to the colony. It's really interesting because even when your main colony is well established, you still have to go back and experience the early game challenges while developing these mini outposts, but with all the knowledge you've gained. I think that's a brilliant idea. Aside from resources, we'll also have some quest objectives in the world. I want to add a bit of lore to the game, but just a tiny bit, enough to give players a sense of purpose. I really enjoy sandbox gameplay in many games, but the lack of a clear goal kills about 80% of the interest for me, because it leaves you unsure of what to work towards. I know a lot of players can enjoy a sandbox without a goal, creating their own challenges, but for me, that sense of aimlessness makes it hard to stay engaged. It's probably more of a psychological thing, because I rarely actually reach the endgame in most games. For example, despite spending countless hours playing RimWorld and starting colonies over 500 times, I've never built the spaceship or completed the game. But just knowing that the spaceship is an option keeps me interested, even if I suspect I'll get bored before I reach that point. So, in my game, there will definitely be a goal. It won't just be a sandbox. But I want to keep the player hooked through the gameplay itself, not through heavy storylines or lore. That's why the narrative will be minimal. And I also want to talk a bit about the combat system. In many colony sims, combat is often very simple. It's either a tower defense style or a basic mechanic where you just place a pawn and they shoot automatically. In my game, I want to take a different approach. I'm a huge fan of turn-based RPGs, and I really enjoy planning out battle strategies and preparing for fights. Let's take Battle Brothers as an example. On the surface, the combat looks simple, but you have to carefully think about positioning and preparation. I want to bring that kind of depth into my game. I'd also like to introduce different roles in the squad, classic roles like tank, DPS, and healer, though in my case it'll be more of a support mage, since I'm making a colony sim, not an RPG, and the health recovery system will be a bit different. And lastly, what I definitely want to mention is the fantasy element. Magic. Lots of magic. But not the kind where you just walk up and conjure food. I want magic to be a valuable resource in the world, and an essential part of casting spells. The world will be populated by all sorts of creatures from the fantasy realm, taking inspiration from something like my once favorite World of Warcraft, with its mobs, bosses, and tons of spells. I have always had a dream of playing a game that is a mix of The Sims and Warcraft, a survival game about a family in a fantasy world. That is the kind of vibe I want to create. So, these are all thoughts and dreams for now. Since I called this video a devlog, I should tell you a bit about what I've already done in the game. Once I realized I was going to make a 2D game, I started thinking about which engine to use. I had quite a bit of experience with Unity, but for several reasons I decided to switch engines and started looking into alternatives. I read up on Godot. At first glance it seemed like it would be enough for my needs. But I was worried about a few aspects of my future game, especially whether I'd be able to create an open world that wouldn't lag constantly when moving across the map. I had previously run into issues with loading parts of the world in the background while the character was running when I was working on a 3D game in Unity. I managed to minimize the lag after a lot of effort, but the solution was a bit of a hack and not very good. The ability to load world chunks in a separate thread would have saved me, but maybe it's just my lack of skill because I couldn't solve that issue smoothly in Unity. Without knowing for sure that I could do seamless dynamic loading, I wouldn't have started this project at all. It was my main concern. But after experimenting with the engine for just one evening, I managed to do what I couldn't properly achieve in Unity. I got a rough working prototype of seamless world loading, so that's a major hurdle cleared and I can move forward from here. The next problem that worried me was how shaders work in Godot. I'm not a shader expert, but I needed to create smooth transitions between tiles in the game without having to place a million sprites all over the map. There will already be a ton of objects in the game, so I had to come up with something more efficient for the terrain. Remembering my 3D game and the terrain shader I created there, I wanted to do something similar in this project, and it worked out perfectly. Along the way, I also realized how to make the shader graph much more compact without losing any visual quality. You should have seen the mess I made for my 3D game's shader. It worked great, but I just didn't think of a simpler, slightly less complex, but still functional approach that I'm now using in my 2D game. So, shaders are working beautifully, and Godot even has built-in tools for working with them using a graph interface. The rest of the concerns I had were less pressing. By this point I was pretty sure that Godot would work for me, and I'd be able to implement the features I needed one way or another. So, I started coding the logic bit by bit. I tackled the more boring but essential stuff first, like the world itself, loading items and characters. I paid a lot of attention to the lighting system, though this is still a work in progress. I'll probably keep tweaking it unless I find a more original approach, but for now, at least the day-night cycle is working. At this point, I feel confident that I can handle this game. The engine will let me implement all the mechanics I need, so now it's just a matter of doing the work.